So I have something very difficult to do now. I'm going to talk about security. Now, how many people here are from the IT side of your organization? Okay, so we have about 15, 20% maybe. So this is going to be really interesting for those 15 to 20%, and hopefully a little bit of an education for the rest of you, but let me tell you, there's no easy way to talk about IT security to a group that large and make it highly compelling. So remember that there is a cliffhanger video that we showed earlier, and I will break this one up with a different video in the middle. But it turns out, in our experience of trying to deploy to so many customers in so many different places, that network connectivity is probably the #1 barrier to adoption. And the #1 requirement for network connectivity in a large enterprise is enterprise mobility management, which lets you connect potentially securely to the enterprise networks so that you could go on Wi-Fi instead of 4G. Some customers that we've worked with won't let you connect to 4G because it's bypassing the IT networks in the first place. And so maybe it works for the POC, but it doesn't work for the rollout. Sooner or later, you have to solve this. It's not so simple, but we have figured it out. And so I'm going to try and give you, in less than 30 minutes, a bit of an education and a bit of a description. It's going to probably not be enough for the IT people and too much for the people that aren't IT people, so please bear with me. Secure deployment. Right, so the first little piece of education here is something called Android Open Source Program, AOSP. This is a type of Android operating system that is not provided by Google. You think of Android provided by Google. But when you buy your phone, unless it's a Huawei phone these days, it comes with a whole series of apps from Google called Google Mobile Services, GMS. And Google has to certify any device as being compatible with those apps. And those apps are things like Gmail and Maps and Hangouts and Chrome and the Play Store and many other apps. And if you're a device manufacturer, Google says you must have all of these or none of these. You can't choose. Now, these apps are not designed for hands-free, voice-driven use. They're designed for touchscreens. And we as a vendor can't change those apps. It's not our source code. So it turns out you cannot make a GMS-compliant device that is hands-free, that has no touchscreen. In fact, Google has a profile called device compatibility, and there is no profile for a hands-free device, and it's not possible to get your device certified as GMS-compliant by Google unless you have a touchscreen. One day this market will be big enough that Google will care to do something about this, and I think we may be the ones to help get it there with your help. But today, not possible. Google Glass uses Android open source. Does not use GMS compliant even though the device comes from Google. So we are using the same type of operating system as Google uses in Glass Enterprise Edition version 2. It's a piece of education that's going to be important later. There are no smart glasses that have the Play Store. None. Not from us, not from anybody. So how do you get apps onto the device? Well, there are 3 ways. First of all, we built our own cloud called RealWear Foresight. And RealWear Foresight is a dedicated device and application management platform that, if you like, is built into the device when it ships from the factory. So out of the box, it can connect to the internet and get its apps. And it's not designed for end users to go discover apps like you do on your phone. It's only an administrator experience. So it means the administrator selects what apps, the administrator at the enterprise selects the apps, chooses them, and they just get delivered, and the end user doesn't really see anything except a little toast that says your app was installed. They don't have to say yes, they don't have to say okay, they don't have to give permission. So it's headless. There's no client experience, and that's by design, because this is not a personal device, it's an enterprise device. And the apps, therefore, that get onto Foresight are not any app, they're trusted apps. They're apps from our partners at the back of the room here. They're apps from the other, up to 200 companies that we have. They're apps that we have looked at and worked with for the user experience, and they're apps that are trusted. They're people we have a relationship with. We have an engineering relationship or a support relationship. So they are more likely to be secure because they're not coming from the Wild West. They're coming from trusted providers. The second way you can get apps on the device is not to use our cloud, but to use the one that you already use for device management. Maybe it comes from VMware AirWatch, or maybe it comes from IBM, or maybe it comes from SOTI or someone else. Same idea, except now it's a different cloud. It's an admin-approved list. It's not anybody. The end user can only get apps from the approved list. These platforms can also set policies. They can make sure that you can connect only to enterprise networks with the correct certificates that provide the correct encryption. And if, like Linda, you have hundreds of plants that you operate at customer sites, in principle, you could have a different set of credentials for each plant, and all of them could be managed by an EMM. And if you set it up correctly, you could connect to any one of them securely, if you set it up correctly, and we're going to come back to that. You can also do things like turn the camera off if you're in a special place, where you're not allowed to have cameras, or turn off the USB. The third way to get apps on the device is the way that many of you may have experienced it if you've only used 1 or 2 or 3 devices, which is you put them in from a USB cable, and we have a tool called RealWear Explorer that runs on a PC or Mac, and you can just copy it over. And that's really great for developers, and it's really great for proof of concepts when you're changing the apps a lot. It isn't terribly secure for a deployment, and so we see that good idea for small pilots, good idea for POCs. You really should disable that when you go to production, because you don't want your users somehow copying an unsecure app that way. And so the EMMs can disable that, and that's the best practice. That's what you should do. The net result is, this isn't a smartphone. Your kids are not installing games on it. We're not sharing files on Dropbox unapproved. We're not connecting to home networks that are not improved. Trusted networks, trusted apps, not driven by the end user, driven by the IT department. This device is inherently at much less risk of IT security issues than, let's say, a bring-your-own-device BYOD smartphone. So, your IT department, and some of you are IT professionals in the room, is used to the security problems of Android associated with BYOD smartphones that people bring into the enterprise network, and then they take it home, and then they do something with it, and they download something bad, and then they take it back to the enterprise network, and it gets uploaded, and now suddenly you have a risk. It's just not typically what's happening with this type of device, because it's a corporate liable device, not a personal device. By default, therefore, if you manage this well, your underlying latent risk is much less. So that's an important point to consider as you think about security. Now let's talk about another dimension of security, which is patches. There are vulnerabilities in operating systems and chipsets and devices all the time, right? Security is not a net destination, it's a journey. Everybody, even Microsoft, has security issues from time to time, and you have to have good practice in patching them. You have to come out with the patches quickly, you have to implement them well, and the customers have to take those software updates, otherwise it's out of date. So we made a commitment to issue security patches regularly, about quarterly. And so we shipped our first Android 8.1 release in March of this year. We've already had 2 security patch updates since then. The next one is scheduled for January, and that's going to bring with it a whole new capability on the Android Enterprise device management, which I'll come to. But not only that, our commitment is that we will keep on providing patches for 2 years after the last date of sale. At some point, it becomes impossible, because the chipset provider provides some of the patches, and the operating system provider provides some of the patches. And if those patches are no longer available, Qualcomm doesn't provide patches forever, then at some point that device can't be supported. But we have negotiated very hard with our vendors like Qualcomm to ensure that we can continue to patch these devices for the 3 years of the product life cycle, or maybe a little more than 3 years in some cases, plus the 2 years of support afterwards. So if you're thinking about consumer smart glasses, nobody cares about any of this, and they're not spending any money on doing it. And I can tell you that already, at our stage of business, we're less than 4 years old, more than half of our engineering goes to what we call current product sustainment versus new product development. And we have our friends from Panasonic in the room, and John will probably tell you that he spends a lot more than that on current product sustainment, because there's a much larger existing business, and that's what happens when you actually sell things, is you have to support and sustain them. And it takes a larger and larger and larger proportion of your available engineering resources. So we, RealWear, have reached the point where we are investing a lot in this area in order to make these products deployable. And so I think this, as you think about the life cycle of device rollouts, these are important considerations. At some point, it's not possible to patch Android 8 anymore. And so the only way to get current with security will be Android 9 or Android 10. That will probably happen in future. Not because we need the functionality, just because we need the ability to continue to sustain the security patches. Don't have a date for that yet. But I think during the life cycle of the HMT-1, I suspect there will be at least one more OS upgrade purely for security purposes. Another thing that we did beginning in release 10, beginning in March, was made it possible to enter your password or PIN number without saying it out loud. Remember, it's a hands-free, voice-driven device. So I don't want to say, my password is PASSWORD. That's not very secure, right? So we developed a method where if you have to enter a password as opposed to regular text, then you can actually select the characters by moving your head, and you just say select. So if you have to enter a 4-digit PIN number, you can say select, 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 select. And nobody knows what the number is. And the same with letters. And maybe if someone wants to see it, we can demo it afterwards. I was going to put it on the slide, but it would take too long. Okay, so we did all this work. Is it working? Well, the HMT-1 is used in some very secure places. One of our customers, Southern Nuclear, part of the Southern Company, it's a large power generation and distribution utility in the southeast United States, is using HMT-1 in nuclear power generation plants. In fact, this is the only Android device they were able to get approved for use in nuclear power generation. You can imagine the type of security considerations that a nuclear plant operator who is probably concerned about being hacked by overseas governments would have for bringing devices into their network. Yes, it took them 8 months to get through the security approvals, but they did it. And so that device is in use today in nuclear power generation. I'm not going to name the names because it's NDA information, but our device has been audited multiple times by the cybersecurity specialists at major critical infrastructure customers in utilities, in oil and gas, in manufacturing. Right? We have a car company customer who was hit by a WannaCry last year, which stopped their production line for a week, building cars. So they're very gun shy. They're very cautious about bringing anything new in. Some of these things are taking a while, but we're generally getting through them, and we're generally succeeding to get to the deployment. Sometimes it takes longer than we would like. Now, we've collected a lot of requirements from these audits, and those requirements have pretty much all been met in our next release that comes in January. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Finally, I mentioned our cloud Foresight. Foresight is secure too. We use standard best practices on cloud management. We tightly restrict who has administration privileges at our company. Of course, we can't see your data, but we can see kind of metadata about the devices, for example. We use all the expected practices on being able to roll back new software updates, being able to back up the database, all the things that you would expect. Today, it's an AWS system. It is our goal to make it portable to other clouds like Microsoft Azure. Not yet, but it's our goal, and I don't have a date, but I hope that it'll be able to be done during 2020. Foresight is important because it keeps the apps updated. So not only does your OS have to be secure, not only does your chipset have to be secure, all the apps you put on it have to be secure too. They could have security vulnerabilities. So they need to be updated regularly. And Foresight is a headless experience where, under administrator control, you can push app updates. It can be automatic. You can automatically update it to the latest one. And you have a lot of control. Update only this group and not the group over there. Update them at different times. Roll back a group and then update it later. So you have a lot of flexibility with the way that you control application updates in Foresight. It can also be done by the EMMs. But the benefit of Foresight is that the RealWear application components come through Foresight. So we're updating our own functionality. And there are some examples here like language translation enhancements, voice keyboard enhancements. Soon we're going to ship an application that lets you connect your smartphone over Bluetooth and make voice calls, voice dialing, hands-free voice dialing like you might do in your car with your headset. and even messaging, two-way messaging, so you might be able to send and receive messages, right? These are application updates, they're not OS updates. It's free functionality that we push out through Foresight. So, some people say, we don't want those apps, thank you very much. Please don't update our devices. We don't like anybody updating our devices. Okay, you can opt out. But we strongly recommend you opt in because it should be more secure and you'll get new functionality. But you have the flexibility to opt out. All right, so I got through the first boring part. So now I get to the break halfway break where I do a little video. So let me introduce my co-founder and our CTO, Dr. Chris Parkinson.
My name is Chris Parkinson, Chief Technology Officer for RealWear. Release 11 for our HMT devices and HMT-1Z1 devices is all about Android Enterprise. It allows us to deploy our headset into large-scale deployments where enterprises today are used to managing and controlling thousands of devices from one central location. That feature is now enabled throughout the HMT-1 device family for the first time ever. We feel that CIOs will really feel the benefit of this release because it allows them to centrally manage all these devices, know where the devices are, control them remotely, wipe them, basically take a full control and secure view of the devices in the field, whether they're locally deployed or remotely around the world at their enterprises. Everything comes under one point of control.
Well, I'm going to cover a few more details, but Release 7 is in final testing is expected to be GA end of January. January 30th is our official date. Things can slip, but that's what the engineering team tells me. So what is it? It's a firmware update that supports Android Enterprise. So what is Android Enterprise? People talk about Android Enterprise, but maybe we don't know exactly what it is. It's a set of consistent APIs, application programming interfaces, for device and app management by enterprise mobility management platforms. Examples of enterprise mobility management platforms are VMware AirWatch, SOTI, MobileIron, platforms like that. If you have a BYOD device, your personal device, for example, it lets you separate the corporate data from the personal data so the two don't get mixed. But our device is really a corporate device. There isn't really expected to be much personal data there. Important, even though it's a Google function, once you set the device up, you do not need a Gmail account or Google Apps on here to manage and install applications. And so it is possible to do Android Enterprise on AOSP, Android Open Source, as opposed to GMS, Google Mobile Certified. Sorry for all the acronyms, it's unavoidable. So, Release 11 supports Android Enterprise. There are three major scenarios that enterprises have been asking us for a long time, which are finally supported in Release 11. The device can be managed by a central device owner. Device owner is a defined term in the security world, and it replaces something that came before called device admin. I won't go into what that was. Device owner means that a central IT department administrator owns your device, not the end user, and gets to say how it's managed, and it's all done through the central console, the same one your company probably uses for managing your smartphones, an EMM console. We also support light touch enrollment. This means that one QR code can be scanned out of the box, turn the HMT-1 on, point it at one QR code, if supported by the EMM provider, and it will enroll you onto the network securely and download all your policies. So take Linda's example. In principle, don't know exactly how Linda manages her network, but in principle, one QR code gets you securely onto a network, downloads all the Wi-Fi certificates for all hundreds of Wi-Fi networks that they might have at all the different plants, and after one QR code is done, you can now take it to any of those places and it will just work. Right? That's the promise. A lot of planning is needed to do this with your IT department, but this is the promise. And file-based encryption, managed by the EMM. We've had file-based encryption before, only managed by Foresight, but this time managed by the third-party EMM. It means just like your phone, you need a PIN number to unlock it. and everything on your device is encrypted if you haven't put that PIN number in it. So if somebody loses the device, there's no data that anyone can use because it's all encrypted. Managed device, light touch enrollment, file-based encryption. These are the three key things. This is probably making more sense to the IT people at the back of the room, but these are big deals according to what customers have told us. Okay, there's a caveat. There are two requirements for this to work on the enterprise mobility management provider. Number one, the console has to implement Android Enterprise. Of course, most of them do because that's the new way of doing things, and it's the standard for Android 9 and Android 10. But in order for it to work with our type of device, an open source Android device, they have to have built what we call a device policy controller, a little piece of software for the device itself that works with AOSP. And not everyone has done that. These three guys have done it, and we have validated it. That's VMware Workspace ONE Unified Endpoint Management. That's the new name for AirWatch, if you know AirWatch, which is probably the #1 market share in our customers. SOTI Mobi Control, well known to some of you, I assume. They're very big in the rugged device category, and so we have a lot of customers that ask for SOTI. And IBM Master 360, a long time ago that was called FiberLink. It's been part of IBM for quite a while. All these three, even though we haven't quite released Release 11 yet, they're already validated and tested. So we should have, finally, if you're a customer, what your IT department needs to connect to your network. And I know this was a long, dry, and boring talk, but it was a tremendous amount of work to get to this point, and this should unlock large-scale deployments from the perspective of your IT department. What about Foresight? Now we have EMM support with Android Enterprise. What about Foresight? Foresight can be set up as the app catalog, the source of trusted applications, even for an EMM that isn't Foresight. So you could have AirWatch manage the HMT-1 and set the policies and set the Wi-Fi networks and manage the groups, but when it needs to get an app, the app could still come from Foresight, which has the big benefit that all the RealWear updates will come that way, automatically without having to do anything else. And there's a few new things coming in Foresight soon, such as the ability to configure things that the EMMs won't be able to configure, like which icons you have on the home screen. We have My Programs, My Files, My Camera. If you've seen the device, you can change what those are. You might have a lot of icons in My Programs, but you might want to hide some of them so your end users can't see them. You have a number of icons in My Controls for settings, and you might want to hide some of them so the users can't use them. All that can be controlled with Foresight soon, not yet, but soon. And also WearML, this is our way that we make existing apps hands-free without changing them, and those files can be deployed from the cloud instead of from a USB cable. So there are still good reasons to use Foresight, even though you probably want to do your large-scale deployments with your existing EMM provider. Now, there's two that I didn't mention. Those are Microsoft Intune and Mobile Iron. And these guys do not have device policy controllers that support Android open source. They rely on the device policy controller that comes with Android by default, which is Google-centric. So not ideal. But the legacy way of doing this still works, which was before we had Android Enterprise, there was something else called Device Admin. That still works, and we have customers using it. General Electric uses Mobile Iron on HMT-1 this way, and Colgate-Palmolive uses, sorry, not Colgate-Palmolive, who's the Intune customer? I forget who it is. Do you remember, Mario? No, all right, I forgot. There's an Intune customer too, using the legacy support. We're in dialogue with Mobile Iron. Can't say yes today, but I'm generally optimistic that we will get there with Mobile Iron. Microsoft, we're going to need your help if you use Intune. We have a developing and growing relationship with Microsoft. It's really a business case question. I think we can get there too, but not there today. So full transparency, I don't know how many device vendors would come up here on stage and talk about security at this level of detail, including what does and doesn't work. But I want you to know that we're serious about solving this. So, I got through my conclusion, more or less, in less than 30 minutes. I really hope I didn't bore you too much. It is an important topic. It is difficult to do with pretty pictures. RealWear is leading the secure, scalable deployments of hands-free Android devices. Thank you. And I left myself enough time to take questions, but this is about as much as I know about security, so we might have a couple of other experts from the company with us that can probably help me out. John.
Sorry, Sanjay. So I was just going to ask, so basically you still need to use 2 consoles to manage the RealWear headset fully?
Well, no, you can do almost everything with, for example, AirWatch, but you're going to need to do more configuration of AirWatch to do so.
So you're saying you need to sort of package or prepare the RealWear packages to be deployed via AirWatch, right?
So, for example, some of those Foresight configuration features, what really happens is we send a file to the device that configures things like my programs and my controls and what the home screen icons are. So that's just a file. So if you pre-prepare that file, you can tell AirWatch to send it. But you have no UX on the cloud for choosing your icons, right? You're going to have to like write it in Notepad or something using JSON syntax, which your IT department can do. And once they've done that, it could be sent by AirWatch. But if you use Foresight, when we finish this work, it's not quite done yet, you'll have a nice, friendly kind of drag and drop sort of environment where you choose what icons go where. So who knows, maybe the other guys will do that. We're not trying to compete with AirWatch or any other provider in device management. We're not supporting non-RealWear devices. What we care about is the agility of getting our updates out to the field and being able to be rapidly responsive to customer requests and things that we learn, and having a platform that's under our control that can push those updates out allows us to get that innovation out to the field a lot faster. Fully know that some enterprises would just not want anything to do with that, and so it can be done with existing EMMs. It's going to take a little more effort.
Thank you.
Good question, though. Any other questions?